This is a Newslaundry podcast and you're listening to NL Hafta.
अंग्रेज अपना लगान और न्यूज़ लॉन्ड्री अपना हफ्ता कभी नहीं छोड़ते. वेलकम टू एपिसोड 373 of Newslaundry Hafta. I am your host Abhinandan Sekhri. Joining me on the panel today are my colleagues, neither of whom are in a wonderful new studio. And in case my voice sounds richer, it is not because I have been doing riyaz every day. It is because we have got these new mics with there's this long thing. What's this called? Preamp. It's called a preamplifier. It's plugged into the mic, so we sound all cooler. But because Anand sir and Raman sir aren't here, they will sound their ordinary selves. So Raman sir is in the hills. Welcome, Raman sir. How are the hills treating you?
Oh, very well. Weather is damn good.
Chalo, I'm glad. Next year you'll be coming to 40 degrees. So much for that then.
Yeah, I know.
And Anand, which part of the country is Anand in? Pune. I see. Chalo, there also the weather's better. We await you with hot winds and 40 degrees.
Yes.
And we look forward to having you guys in the studio next time so that you can see.
Yes. Next week, I'll be in the studio.
Yes, next recording in the studio. I will be back in Delhi from Sunday onwards.
Excellent. And also joining us on the phone line from London is Alpana Kishore. She'll be joining us shortly. Alpana has appeared on the Hafta earlier. She is my former boss. She was my immediate boss, and Madhu was the super boss when I was at Newstrack. Alpana will be here talking about Kashmir because Kashmir has dominated headlines in the last, actually more than a week, 10 days. It's even been discussed in Parliament thanks to this film by Vivek Agnihotri. And I was surprised that other than one particular discussion, I think it was on Network 18, where they had a reporter who had covered Kashmir in the 80s and 90s. All the commentators were people like us. Raman sir, of course, has covered Kashmir because he was also the bureau chief there. But it's in people like me who have never covered Kashmir but are peloing yarn. So I was like, if there are reporters who are out there and if legacy media won't call them for whatever reason. In fact, I'm surprised Madhu hasn't been on any of those panels because she was overseeing the most extensive coverage of anyone in Kashmir was done by Madhu's team, and yet I don't see her on any panel. Fascinating. But before that, a couple of announcements and the headlines. Manisha's on leave. She'll be back next week, hopefully. I will be hosting Nuisance this week. So in case that puts you off, don't watch it because it's not Manisha. But if you are okay tolerating my face, do watch it. We have a new page for subscribers. Some of you are still writing to podcasts@newslaundry.com, which is fine, but it would be better if you use the link below, which takes you to newslaundry.com/podcast-letters. The link is in the show notes. It's just a more efficient system for you to tell us your critique, your criticism, and your feedback. And we have a Newslaundry chat box on Saturday, the 26th of March. I repeat, Saturday, the 26th of March at 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time. You can use the article link that's given below. This is for subscribers only. If you can't make it to the chat box at that time where we have live interaction with all of you, us subscribers, you can leave your question in the comment section of the article and we will take it during the session. So the link to the article page for the chat box is in the show notes below. Check it out. Now for the headlines. In March, Reporters Without Borders has said that India ranked 142 out of 180 countries when it comes to press freedom. It's added that the nation was classified as quote-unquote bad for journalism. The media watchdog in a report in December had said that India was among the 5 most dangerous nations in terms of journalists killed across the world this year. Most of the others are war-torn places, so that gives you a bit of an idea of where India is. The Indian government, on the other hand, disagrees with the rank the country has been given on the Press Freedom League, as the index gives little or no weightage to the fundamentals of democracy and bases its conclusion on small sample size. This was said by Information Broadcasting Minister Anurag Thakur. He said this in Parliament. Then the family of photojournalist Danish Siddiqui, you remember he died in Afghanistan when the Taliban was taking over. The family of this very gifted photographer has filed a complaint before the International Criminal Court to investigate his death and bring justice to those responsible, including leaders and high-level commanders of the Taliban. So that's an interesting case. Let's see if it gets anywhere. It would be interesting to follow. Then a Delhi court has summoned Subramaniam Swami in a defamation case filed by BJP leader Tajinder Pal Singh Bagga. So we must cover this. This sounds interesting.
And this Bagga was the person who slapped Prashant Bhushan.
Yeah, he and his guy, they had barged into his office. Basically, he was this small town tucha who'd go around,
Yeah.
So now, of course, then BJP embraced him as a spokesperson. But now he and Subramaniam Swami got into some sort of spat. So he's filed a case against Subramaniam Swami. Then Akhilesh Yadav and Azam Khan have resigned from the Lok Sabha to build the Samajwadi Party's turf in Uttar Pradesh. The day after quitting Lok Sabha, Akhilesh says he will take the people's struggle from Sadak to Sadak. Basically from Sadan to Sadak, from Sadan to Sadak. So he's no longer a member of parliament and he is going to focus his energy on forming a formidable opposition to Yogi Adityanath's government in Uttar Pradesh. What do you think of this, Anand? Is this a smart move in your view politically? Because, well, more than what I guess Rahul is doing. What do you think?
Yes, means the local sentiment is very doubtful about people who migrate to Delhi for national politics and still are aiming for political clout in their states. So in that sense, it's good to be entrenched in state politics and so better intent of taking the fight to the state government. So in that way, it is a good political messaging, even if it is cosmetic. It makes for a good political communication.
Right, and much of politics is optics. Then the Delhi court has granted regular bail to P. Chidambaram and his son Karti Chidambaram in the Aircel Maxis money laundering case. Meanwhile, a Delhi court has rejected the bail of Umar Khalid, the former JNU student leader, in the Delhi riots case. This is it boggles my mind how Umar Khalid is in jail for so long on such flimsy or no evidence. Then, despite losing his seat in the Khatima constituency in the assembly election, Pushkar Singh Dhami on Wednesday took oath as the Chief Minister of Uttarakhand. And I will say, the BJP, the transitions of power or retaining Chief Ministers or replacing them is pretty painless. I mean, we didn't see any noises of dissent coming from the Uttarakhand that despite losing how is being made. So there is, I guess, an upside to the centralization of power. It keeps the bickering at state levels kind of down. Or am I being too simplistic? Raman sir, Anand, you have a view on that?
Discipline sounds all well when you are in power. If Congress was very powerful now, you would have seen a lot of dissenting voices fall in line. So if you are powerful, if you are ruling number of states, then discipline is easier to enforce rather than when you are in dire straits. Also, I think the commentary has been that Dhami was seen as a doer and he might have lost his own seat, but as a doer, and in the last 3-4 months, he was seen as energizing the campaign. So also some demographic consideration might have gone into his favor, a particular section of voters. Last but the big leader means the supremo of the party. We saw Mamata Banerjee losing her own seat and still being chief minister, but then she is the party's supremo. But here the case was different. He was handpicked by the high command in Delhi.
Dhami is a young leader. He is in good books of the RSS. And yes, ever since he had taken over as CM, at least I do come to Uttarakhand, but I haven't seen, I can't pinpoint one thing that Dhami had done in the state. But yes, every 15 minutes, I knew about Uttarakhand through the radio. In
Ads.
Dhami's, it was an ad where the Dhami himself is talking and eulogizing, about Uttarakhand. And every 10-15 minutes it was coming out on all the radio channels, whether you are in Delhi or elsewhere. So yes, he energized in that sense. And I think he was the campaign leader. He might have. It doesn't matter much that he lost his seat, and he lost in the. I think he fought from the Kumaon area. In Kumaon area, Congress has won. Quite a number of seats.
Right. And also, I think that's a good point that Anand made, that when you are powerful, then discipline is easier to enforce. I remember, in the mid 2000s, around when I was, writing, basically 2003-4, that 1 year when Atalji was on his way out, and two of those leaders, in fact, three of them are no longer alive. But I remember between Venkaiah Naidu, Pramod Mahajan, Arun Jaitley and Sushma Swaraj, there was this jostling about who's going to be the number one of the second rung. Because the first rung was Atalji and Advani. That was undisputed. And that battle had been won by Atal, and he was undisputed number one. In this, and I remember there used to be so many plants coming. One is planting a story against the other. And I'm sure the party leadership knew, but no one could do anything because there wasn't this kind of power. I don't think today any second level reader will try to plant stories against each other. I think between Amit Shah and Modi, they'll just, everyone is completely disciplined.
No, it's just a matter of time. If Modi's stature declines, then the bickering will start. But of course, right now, you can't even think of it. It happens. In Congress also, the leadership, the stature has gone down. That's why things are
correct.
happening. There's no discipline.
Now, the series of Kashmir-related headlines. The former Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister Farooq Abdullah dubbed the Kashmir Files a propaganda film and said the BJP is asking everyone in the country to watch the movie to make people hate us to the extreme. Meanwhile, an IAS officer in Madhya Pradesh, he's run into trouble with the state government over tweets calling on the makers of the Kashmir Files to also produce movies on the killings of a large number of Muslims across several states. I find this fascinating because so many bureaucrats tweet the most hateful stuff and no action is taken against them. And this guy, now there's being action taken against him. Then Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman on Wednesday accused country's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru of internationalizing the Kashmir issue by taking it to the United Nations. So everyone is now weighing in on this basically.
But Nehru had gone to the UN to say that we do not accept plebiscite. So that's what the opposition is saying.
So, I just think, first of all, you guys must check out a graphic novel on Kashmir called Kashmir Ki Kahani. It is also out now in physical form. It's based on the digital graphic novel that was done. I think the year after Newslaundry started. It was one of our first few projects. It is an amazing, fascinating story of the history of Kashmir, and we've updated it to now because at that time we finished it in 2013 or 14 whenever it was put out. So you can write into us and at contact@newslaundry.com if you want to pre-book a copy of that. I assure you'll like it. And regarding Kashmir and this entire conversation that's come up thanks to this film, I hope in this podcast you'll be able to answer many questions which I haven't seen answered on any of the channels that I've watched. And luckily we have Alpana who will be talking to us about this. Then in other headlines, the Union Cabinet has cleared the bill to merge 3 Delhi corporations. That is a North Delhi Municipal Corporation, East Delhi Municipal Corporation and South Delhi Municipal Corporation. So this basically was done in 2011 and now they want to get all 3 together, and this is being done just on the eve of the MCD election, which the AAP is claiming the BJP is scared because of momentum they're certainly going to lose, and now they're doing all these ploys to delay the election. And carry on, sir?
No, they haven't the government hasn't spelled out the other features of this bill, which they're going to, introduce in Parliament next week.
Right.
What we need to see whether who is going to fund these municipal? I think the center is going to take most of its control. I don't know why do we even have this the state government in Delhi? I don't think we require them anymore.
Yeah, because I think they're making the state government as irrelevant as possible.
Yeah.
In fact, back when these three were in 2011, when the three were separated, it was done, and at that time, the political gossip was that Sheila Dikshit basically got this done, and it was the Congress rule in the center as well, because the Delhi mayor had more budget and power than the chief minister. So she, to say that I should be more powerful, it was trifurcated. And now, for the exact opposite reason, the BJP wants to get together so mayor can be more powerful than the chief minister. Then the Haryana Assembly on Tuesday passed a bill against religious conversions amid a walkout by the Congress. So all this religious conversion type bills, a contagion has happened, and slowly we see other states also embracing their versions of it. Then the opposition stalled the proceedings of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha over the fuel price. On Wednesday, the fuel price has gone up 2 days consecutively. Depending on which state you are, it could be anything from a few rupees to 80 paisa. And in Bombay, it's really expensive, man. When I was seeing the list, thank God I don't live there. Rahul Gandhi says lockdown on inflation removed as government hikes fuel prices. So he says inflation में lockdown लगा था, अब उठ गया. Then Sonia Gandhi reached out to the dissenting G23 leaders discussing ways to strengthen the party, and she said that by the time the next elections happen, there will be changes made. So she does seem to be reaching out. Meanwhile, in the ghastly incident, videos of which have been doing the rounds, 10, depending on what numbers you believe, some say a lot more. People, predominantly women and children, were burnt alive after a TMC leader's murder. Mamata Banerjee's party leader was murdered in that area. It was ghastly. The videos are available of this. The governor, Dhankar, who's in Darjeeling, had expressed anguish over the killings, and Mamata Banerjee termed his comments highly unfortunate and unbecoming a person holding a dignified constitutional post. The Prime Minister Narendra Modi also weighed in on this and described the killing in Birbhum as heinous. Many people from the BJP and also journalist community have asked for some sort of a robust and credible investigation, because the violence in Bengal just doesn't seem to end, and there doesn't seem to be any retribution either. Then in Karnataka, Muslim traders have been banned from having stalls at several temple fairs and in and around temple areas. The Chief Minister, Bomai, has quoted in Assembly an existing rule, which I didn't even actually know, which actually prohibits non-Hindus from having any sort of commercial establishments in and around temple premises. So just for the record, this is not a new thing, but these posters came up around temples that all you non-Muslims, non-Hindus, and calling Muslims a name, pack up your shops here and go, including radies. But that's not owning a shop. A radie can, go around anywhere. So the Chief Minister said that this law existed. So, it's legit. But they will take action against anyone who tries to remove radies. I don't know if that'll happen. Anand, Raman, were you aware of this law in Karnataka?
No, I'm not. I wasn't.
Were you, Anand?
No, these are state laws, and that also is very statutory, very specific laws. I think most of us would not be aware of that.
So
in Delhi, there used to be a law. There was a law, in fact, that you cannot come up with a liquor shop within the 100-meter of any temple or a church or a masjid. That law was there, and I remember when I was a reporter, I did a story along those lines. But this law, yes, as Anand is right, it's state specific,
and it's not new. So I'm surprised when this law was initially passed, a bigger noise wasn't made around it anyway.
I know.
Then the ripples of Sri Lanka's economic crisis are now being felt on Indian shores. On Tuesday, 16 Sri Lankan nationals, all Tamils from the Jaffna and Mannar regions, reached Tamil Nadu in 2 batches. If you haven't been following, the economic situation in Sri Lanka is spiraling in a real disaster zone. And in fact, was it one of the Indian political leaders who said that it's the president responsible? I think maybe Subramaniam Swami said that it's just misgovernance. So the Coast Guard rescued these people, and Sri Lanka is going through a real economic crisis. And in a report that has just come out, it is revealed that over 2,150 cases of deaths in judicial custody happened in 21-22. This was the government answer in Lok Sabha. So that's over 2,000 people, which is about the number of people who officially died in the Delhi riot of 84, and approximately the similar amount of number of people have died in the Gujarat riot of 2002. Those many people died in custody in India last year. I mean, just to give you an idea of how casually we treat custodial deaths in our country. And finally, human error appears to be the likely reason for the accidental firing of a missile into Pakistan 2 weeks ago. There is apparently a court of inquiry that is probing the incident, and they're examining the role of a group captain and some other officials for alleged lapses. Let's see what comes of this. So that's quite a long list of headlines we had this week, but much happened and there was no one big news. If you've been following what's happening in Ukraine, there's a bit of more of the same, a bit more grandstanding. So we will not discuss that, and we discussed that in detail last week. So let me first go to, oh wait, Alpana's here. So yes, bang in time. Hi Alpana, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Nico. I can hear you.
Yes, so Alpana, as we used to call her, Alps, has joined us. You're in the UK, Alps?
Yes, I am in the UK right now.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, thank you for joining us. We just finished the headlines. We'll start the conversation. In fact, we can start with Kashmir only, and then we can discuss.
Thanks for having me.
Other aspects later. Alpana, other than being my former boss, is a senior journalist and writer. She's reported extensively on Jammu and Kashmir for Newstrack at the peak of the conflict. I have introduced her before to all our audience here on Hafta. She most famously, or if not most famously, at least it was the most dramatic video footage that I remember, interviewed Mast Gul, a dreaded militant of the time who had burnt a mazar called the Charare Sharif and escaped. She interviewed him in the wild, not in custody. And she was part of the team that did extensive coverage of Jammu and Kashmir in the 80s and 90s. So thank you for joining us. And also joining us on the phone line are Raman and Anand.
Hi, Alpana.
Hi, Raman. How are you?
Hi. Great. Good to have you.
So
thank you.
I'll just quickly get to Kashmir. I was just asking Anand, about the Sri Lanka economic crisis, briefly. Anand, any reason? Is it that it's too tiny a country? It hasn't made much news, right? Anywhere? I haven't seen other than today's paper. And do you know what?
It has been making.
Okay.
For last 6-7 months, but yes, not that prominently. But if you see the inside world affairs pages, it has been making.
And what is it? Is it basically because the economy was very dependent on imports? Is it supply chain issues? Is it tourism? Why this dramatic spiral into disaster?
A combination of all that, including pandemic.
Right. Yeah. So Alps, if we, this week, I don't know how much of Indian media you consume over there. Very little, I'm guessing.
Enough online to be up to date, I suppose, to some extent.
Okay, but you miss out on the primetime debates, which are the crowning glory of Indian news media.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I get to see some of them, but not all. Yeah.
We've had more debates, on this in Indian media in the last 10 days with this film as the hook than I have seen, I think, in the last 10 years of reporting on the media when Newslaundry came about. And I'm really surprised that Vivek Agnihotri has that kind of clout, or is the mascot for making this a new political issue to contest elections on. But I have 2 or 3 quick questions. After that, you can elaborate on the state of Kashmir, and you were covering it. Has any channel got in touch with you to talk about it?
No, except for you. No.
Wow. Meanwhile, they have Anand, Ranganathan and everybody else commenting on it. So not a single channel got in touch with the reporter who actually reported there. Are you in touch with Mini or Nutan or anyone? Has anyone got in touch with any of them? Because I haven't seen them on any channel either.
Of course, I'm in touch with Mini and Nutan. I have no idea whether they've been contacted, but both Mini and Nutan, of course, had some a reportage on Kashmir, but Mini, I think, was mostly concentrating on Punjab, the Khalistan movement at that time. So possibly, I don't know. But yeah, she was very much there.
That is still more experience than the ones we are subject to in prime time.
And don't forget, we were all witness to what happened then. So we know the story. We were witness. I mean, even if you didn't report on it, you read it, you heard it, you saw what was happening. And TV was nowhere near it is today, but still, I mean, Doordarshan you saw, and of course, Newstrack. Newstrack showed everything. I mean, it is possibly the most authentic document of that era. Those tapes are invaluable to see
and
actually
yet,
what happened.
We haven't seen that footage telecast by the channel that owns the rights for that, which is United. We haven't seen either
that's
you.
Really a travesty.
We haven't seen you or Nutan or Madhu on any channel talking about it. The people who were there, but we've seen all sorts of other players talking about it. So, so that's my second question is: you've seen the film?
Yes, I have.
Okay,
I have.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I managed to see it.
And I will say I did see Manoj on one show on Network 18 of this anchor we have called Gullu, whose real name is, it'll come to me, Amish Devgun. But we refer to him lovingly as Gullu because he's kind of cute like that. He was shouting, and I think Manoj was a little shocked that someone could shout that much, even by his standards. So he was kind of stunned into silence watching this guy. But now, when you see the film, to begin with, can you tell me what is factually inaccurate? What is factually accurate enough for a film, and what is accurate but out of context, in any order you want?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think the film is a series of factual episodes. So, everything that's shown did happen. But there is absolutely no context. So let me just elaborate on this for today's listeners, viewers. I mean, we are currently witnessing the war in Ukraine. Now, suppose there's no social media, there's no live television. You hear about this war in Ukraine, and you know there's bombardment and the cities are being destroyed, etc., but you don't really know what's happening. 30 years later, I presume some kind of a Ukrainian film appears and only shows you the bombardment, the destruction, and the hell. Now, you, as an Indian, you might start questioning, but hey, why did the Indian government not support Ukraine in the UN? I mean, this is such a black and white issue. I mean, here are these people being bombarded, killed, 10 million of them running away. Is there a second side to it? How did the Indian government then abstain from this vote? Why did it, not make its voice heard for this terrible injustice to the people? So I think you have to understand that there's complexity, there's nuance, and there is a larger picture. Obviously, the Indian government understood that larger picture. It has interests, it has alliances, and it has an understanding of geography. It understands that Ukraine cannot escape its geography. It understands that there will always be a role that Russia will play in Ukraine. And the threat to Russia by Ukraine's desire to join the NATO is very real to Russia. And it will do everything in its power, like most nation states do, including the United States of America, including India, to protect its neighborhood from its enemy. Now, all this cannot be encapsulated in a film which only shows you the bombardment. So how does one explain to somebody 30 years later that, hey, there's a bigger story, there's a larger picture? Yes, this terrible thing happened, and it is a tragedy, but there is more to the picture. So I think that context is missing from the film entirely. So the narrative is ideological. So it's not, I can't accept it as truth. Yes, it is truth. The truth is there in the episodes, but the ideological domination of the narrative is such that I'm never allowed to see what the other side has to say. They're only painted black, but they must have some story. They must have something to say.
Right. And also, I was a little surprised at the level of, like, the demonization is so complete that, even Amrish Puri as Mogambo had more grays than
exactly. That's what I'm saying. There must be something for them to say. They can't be these completely black demons, monsters, terrible people. I know personally of stories that say the complete opposite.
Right.
So, is somebody allowed to say those stories? Are we allowed to, say that in this atmosphere? I'm not sure.
So we'll come back to more on this. Raman sir, have you watched the film?
No, I couldn't. Because I'm here in the hills,
I see.
so I could not watch the film.
So is it tax free in your state? Because it's tax free, I think in 6 states have made it tax free.
Uttarakhand, I think the Dhami has just been the chief minister, so
Achha,
he's
so-
going to
No, but
make
since
it.
this is clearly the number one issue that even the Prime Minister decided to speak about. What do you make of the conversation around it? So you've also been in Kashmir, even you weren't there during the peak militancy, but you've worked out of Kashmir for a long time as resident editor.
I was there in 2000. So even, every time when you go there, anybody who goes there, it is always the peak. Like I went when I landed in Srinagar for the first time, that 36 Sikhs were massacred at Chhattisingpura. So I remember I took the flight in the morning. It happened a day before it happened, and in the morning I learnt about it. And even in Jammu, when I was flying to Srinagar, all roads were blocked. So I somehow, even though my taxi was stopped, so I just ran to I had reached about 2 kilometers around the airport. So I ran to the airport. I took my flight, went to Srinagar, and my Muzammil used to be my reporter in Indian Express, and photographer was Javed. So they had come in their Maruti 800, so I straight went to Chhattisingpura. So yes, it was pretty bad even at that time. But yes, Alpana was there in 90s when the Pandit thing happened. When I went there were hardly any Pandits.
Right. Anand, have you watched the film? Anand?
No, I have not.
Okay. You have any comments on the noise around it and the fact that it's been brought up in Parliament? It's, the PM has commented saying something that was very thrilled to hear, that the answer to a film is a film. That was like Rashti said, the answer to a book is a book. I was like, Rashti, Modi, same, nice. But you have any comment around it becoming such an event? I was surprised by it.
No, see, I have not seen it. Maybe because I'm preoccupied with other concerns, or I'm too lazy to go to a theater. I have not seen a film in theater in last 4 years. So that is it. But you see, it's just a 3 decades old thing, and just imagine that if we are so divided about establishing facts and something that was history in making in front of our own eyes, then what to do about the historical debates around historical events, processes, and that are centuries old. So the history being in no man's land, maybe a very happy hunting ground for the historian, or in this case, a filmmaker or anyone. So establishing facts from a very objective point of view, it seems almost impossible. This also is compounded by a kind of fatigue also, maybe not fatigue in all, but I think there has been, and people say that the information overload, but Kashmir is a case of narrative overload. So Kashmir, because of its internationalization, because of being an international dispute, whether Indian official stand is that or not, is a case of international media focus and everything. So there has been oversupply of narratives from there. And for me, a news consumer like me, I just navigate through the headlines and very basic facts, and not beyond that, because there was a point of time where we were overburdened with Kashmir stories. Now also, it's an overcovered area. For such a large country like India, where you can find 1,000 narratives and 1,000 pieces of news every day, sometimes you feel that Kashmir walks away with the cake. So that is one thing. Third is that my point comes when, as the Prime Minister said, that even in his initial reaction, he said that the filmmaker has shown the truth as he sees it. Now, as he sees it is an important qualifier there, because he is, at least the Prime Minister was not emphasizing that that's the truth, but that's how the filmmaker saw the truth. So it's an important qualifier that filmmakers.
Can I just say one thing at this moment? Sorry to interrupt. You've given a very pertinent point, Anand, that he talked about as he sees it. But that is the job of the censor board in this country. I remember when we did Newstrack, we were not allowed to carry a single narrative. We had to carry the rejoinder. I mean, sometimes our stories were stopped because we only had one side of the view. We didn't have the other side. So institutions are eroded to such a great extent that the censor board, who would have never, ever passed this film earlier, has not only passed it, has passed it without any kind of cuts, because this kind of thing has always led to incitement. And it has led to it earlier as well. And the state or the establishment was conscious of the fact that in a country like India, incitement is just a breath away. You have to be careful with your facts. You have to present them in a fair and balanced way. I don't think this film is that. And I think the institution that was supposed to not allow the filmmaker to show it just as he sees it, but also to balance the facts, did not do his job.
But other than that, one institution, Alps, there's the other where this one particular army officer who, died while serving. There's a little episode with him, and she said that's not how it played out. And I know, I've said this in Hafta last week, I personally know of 2 scripts which are being made that involve characters from the army that was sent back to be rewritten, because there is a department in the army that passes anything that has the army featuring or references to the army. And if the wife or the widow of one of the late officers is saying that this is not how it happened, but yet the institution that is there, that is sending scripts back, decides not to say anything. I find that fascinating. But Anand, finish your thought, then we'll come back to Alpana and Raman.
So maybe that's a fair point, but I think still the distinction is being made between the news reporters and a film, because I think film still can get away with a creative license, and to what extent it was pitched as a very factual documentary or factual piece of work, I don't know. But there is also this thing that the portrayal of reality at the end of the day is a portrayal. It may not be the reality itself. So that somehow gives films and even documentaries some leeway. So that can distinguish it from journalism or some, say, very fact-finding missions, or say
or an academic pursuit, that's fact-finding.
Academic pursuit, or
right.
You say, or any kind of historian's project or something like that. So that fourth point is that I think it had a cathartic because it made ripples, because of course it had a certain kind of resonance with an ideological project, and that was in the UK, one of the most prominent philosophers, Sir Roger Scruton, who passed away, I think 2 years ago or last year. So he had made a point, and this has to be taken in its entirety, so it can be easily misunderstood. He said that the majority need not only be not ignored, but it should be respected. That is to say that it should not be respected more than the minority, but in the equivalence of respect for all communities in a pluralistic society, the majority voice or its tales of victimhood cannot be drowned down just because it's coming from a particular community. And it is not to put at any other community at disadvantage, but also to see that in our virtuous incarnations as say, guardians of particular set of values, we don't become distant or somehow aloof to a certain kind of voices coming from the majority community. Now, this ideological framing of it, the political forces at the hem of affairs now they might have used it in a way that has found resonance in this project. So that could be a further point. Yes.
So yes, sir, go ahead.
I have not seen the movie, so, and I think he's free to make any kind of movie that he wants to, but the politics of it is quite evident. That this movie has been used as an ideological instrument to spread hatred against Muslims is quite evident. I mean, it's not that they might have done it; they have done it. If you see the systematically, I mean, in all the BJP states, the way it was made tax-free. I mean, one state chief minister, he went ahead and he said he's going to show it free of cost to all the
he said if you show the ticket. No, I think, sir, not only that, the fact that it isn't accompanied by any condemnation of the videos of incitement, that like you can do that. You can say that, okay, watch this film, it's important. But please, after watching it in the hall, don't start abusing Muslims and making a noise. That condemnation hasn't come from anyone, which would be okay if they weren't talking about the film at all. But if they're talking about it and not talking about this aspect, that makes it too clear. Sorry, Alps, to come back to you, I did watch the film finally. I think you and I are the only one on the panel who had the time to watch the film, even though I know you're very busy moving in London. But the two things that surprised me, and I think this, I also said this in the Awful and Awesome episode, a lot of people really spoke about how ideologically hateful it is, all the political problems, but they preceded it by saying, but, Anupam Kher has acted really well. There have been some very well shot scenes. I watched it and I watched it with an open mind. I really think Anupam Kher, this is one of his really not good performances at all. So I think a lot of people
overacting.
And it's really bad.
And I think his emotions have got the better of his craft, which is, I'm really sorry to say, he's a very fine actor. I've seen him act on stage. He is superb at nuance. There's no nuance in this role.
And it is like just bad terrible. 80s overacting. So I think a lot of people who
hammy and overdone, over shrill. It's a shrill kind of acting. And I'm sure if he sees it 10 years later with an open mind, he'll agree.
So, I thought that a lot of people were finding things to appreciate about the film so that they can condemn its politics, so to sound balanced. And this monkey balancing is the exact corollary of what Anand was saying at a philosophical level, that there is a tendency of the majority to ignore, an aspect, a part of the majority to ignore majority grouses because you don't want to upset the minority. Similarly, I think there is a tendency of many liberal voices to say, let me find 2-3 things to say nice so I can condemn its politics. Exactly. It is such a badly made film. I was like, wow. Is this all it takes to brainwash people? Then we can make shitty films like in 10 days, every 10 days.
Which is why I come back to the role of the censor board, which is an institution, when it's correctly done, not ideologically driven, is here to protect people from incitement. It's not a question of a filmmaker. I'm sorry, I disagree with two of the panelists at least. I do not agree that anyone should have the freedom to make anything they want. He can't make a film he likes. It has to be a film that fits into some sort of, balanced narrative. It has a public release. Otherwise, he's free to make a personal documentary, show it around and everything. But if it has a public release, it is certified by the censor board, then it has to fit certain parameters. It's been certified, but it doesn't fit those parameters at all. So, and which I think is essential. But coming back to your, again, something that Anand said about the majoritarian aspect of it, or the majority, how the majority's grouses should not be ignored. I think this fits absolutely correctly in the Kashmir narrative when it comes to the Kashmiri Pandit and Kashmiri Muslim equation. Kashmiri Pandits are a tiny, tiny minority in the larger Kashmiri population. Tiny means 3-4%, not even more than that. Yet they have had the most powerful or privileged position, not just economically, but even the power equation is what I'm talking about. For the last 300-400 years, they have been the ones in power. They may not have been the majority, but they had the ear of the powerful. They were the interlocutors of power. They were the administrators. They were, even if it was the Sikhs, Afghans, and Dogras, these are the three rulers who ruled over Kashmir in the years before 1947. None of them was a Kashmiri. Each of them used the Pandits as their interlocutors. And I'm afraid that role carried on post 1947, even when democracy came. And then the Muslims became the larger sort of voice, which they never were, because they were always the poorer classes, the manual, labor classes, whereas the Kashmiri Pandits were the landowners, they were the administrators. So this exercise, this imbalance of power, which would have naturally corrected itself in 1947, did not fully correct itself. Yes, to some great extent, the Kashmiri Pandits were turned away from the government jobs they had automatic access to, and so on, but they still had the ear of the center. So they were the ones who advised the center what to do in Kashmir. So what I'm saying is that if the majority is not happy, which the Kashmiri Muslims were not, right from the 50s, for whatever reasons. Now you can debate that, were they right to be happy or not right to be, whatever it was, but they were not happy. And the movement against Indian, rule in Kashmir started in bits and pieces. Peace came, it returned, went back again. Sheikh Abdullah, all kinds of things happened in between the 50s and the 80s. In the 80s, particularly, the center rigged elections in Kashmir. It toppled 2-3 governments. It, interfered massively. And the amazing thing is that nobody talks about it now, but a lot of Indian public opinion felt sympathy towards the Kashmiris when all this was happening, because at that time, center-state relations were extremely biased in favor of the center. There was no question of a strong state. A strong center meant the states had to be weak. This was the Congress or the Indira Gandhi era, and this is how things were at that time. So there was a great deal of sympathy for the Kashmiri Muslims and their governments being toppled and the rigged elections, etc., etc. So there was, what I'm trying to say is there's an atmosphere of anger against the center. Now, if the Kashmiri Pandit wants to, he of course is seen as the agent of the center at that point in time. And if he wants to be if he wants to stand out as a minority in this larger majority opinion, then it's really difficult practically to be not a target, because, at some point in time, the power balance tips and you are left in that tiny minority, which is terrifying and which is scary and which is exactly what happened. So
what you're saying is that thing, not only does it exist at a national level, it exists at a state level also. It exists at 2 levels basically, and in both it's a mirror.
I mean, just like the right-wing government today demands that minorities in India must respect and must be within what they think is nationalist. So you're not allowed that complete exercise of your identity. I want a Sharia law, or I want 4 wives, or I want to divorce when I want to. This is specifically what this government has cracked down on. In the same way, it's the opposite picture in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, especially in the Kashmir Valley itself, which is a tiny, tiny portion. It's just a small little valley, but it has the largest population. And that's why it was important in the state, because it automatically, the larger majority were the ones in power.
Now,
if you stick out as a sore thumb, yeah.
Alps, this one that you told me about, just two things, if you could just quickly elaborate on, and then I'll move to Anand and Raman.
Yeah.
One is this reference that they have of Bhat Mazar, which, thousands of Kashmiri Hindus were killed over there. And
Right.
it is more of a historical thing of a regime that actually didn't differentiate between Kashmiris and Muslim Kashmiris. They were killing all of them.
Yes.
And somehow in this film, it is shown that it is unique to during this time. That was one aspect. And the second aspect that today's news consumers would not be aware of is the Kashmir of the 80s was not the Kashmir of today. It was here today, gone tomorrow. Could you just elaborate about both these points a little bit?
See, so first of all, the question of Kashmiri Pandit and Kashmiri Muslim history is a question, or actually Kashmiri history, is that a whole bunch of outsiders came and ruled Kashmir at various times. Sometimes it benefited the Kashmiri Muslim. Most times, or it benefited the Kashmiri Pandit who was in power. But most times, it benefited neither, because these were outsiders who were bent on extracting their, like any colonial rule. I mean, the British or first the Mughals came, then the Afghans came, then the Sikhs came, then the Dogras came. So they've had a succession of rulers who were not Kashmiri, which is fair enough, because, that's how the whole of India has been ruled. Various parts of India, there were tiny states which were taken over by larger states, which were taken over by larger states. So that's the way history functions. But what happened here is that because of the two very sharply different sets of communities within Kashmir, there are different times in history when Kashmiri Pandits were terribly badly treated by Sikandar Butchikan, who was known as the idol killer because he had such a rule of terror, and the Kashmiris fled the valley, etc. To the Afghan times when the Kashmiri Muslims were also treated like worse than slave labor, drowned in the Dal Lake, all kinds of terrible atrocities that happened to both communities. So what I dislike about this film particularly is the way it keeps telling you Muslims are terrible, they're black, they're awful. The one thing that I can say with complete conviction, and any look back at recent history will show you, is that no Indian Muslim ever, put across a sort of inter-community sort of sympathetic look at Kashmir. Never, not even once. They stayed scrupulously away from it. They joined the national narrative, which wanted, which thought of Kashmir as part of India. They never once, had that sort of inter-religious sort of community empathy, nothing of the sort ever, all through the Islamist propaganda happening in Kashmir at that point in time. So to paint an entire community, I mean, you have a problem with Kashmiri Muslims, which also I think that of course that there's another story to it as well. I mean, if you talk about the 90s, it's all about human rights against the Kashmiri Muslims, but also the huge amount of 80,000 deaths of Kashmiri Muslims in the valley, not by security forces, but by militants. So
that
they
number
have suffered terribly.
that number is not demonstrated in any way that 80,000 Muslims also died. That's nowhere.
Yes, and innocent Muslims, people picked off in villages, or just for being having a policeman in the family, or having a relative who worked in the government, or just for no reason, just like that. You can't protect yourself, and this is what this is why I feel that to show it in this way is to just blindly start a campaign of hatred against a particular community. When, like I said, the Indian Muslim has been exemplary in his or her conduct all through as a true nationalist Indian community. Absolutely, an exemplary minority community in India.
Right, Anand, you were making a point, and then Raman, so you can come in after that.
Just two brief points. I think what a film or any piece of work, or maybe even rigorous academic work like a historian's book, research, can have limitations. Limitations of not only the framework, the analytical tools, but also what he wants to see. So the famous E.H. Ka dictum that read the historian before you read the history, he will write the history that he wants. So that goes well for the filmmakers also. And I don't believe that filmmakers are very much invested in recreating a history. I have not seen a very say very balanced or very documentary or very balanced film or something. I think his was always a lopsided project to begin with. So to have expectation that what message it will have for the nation is quite another thing. But he had a very limited frame. I have not seen the film, but what I gathered from what I listen and read is that it's a limited frame, and to have too much intellectual expectation out of it would be stretching it too much. So second is that coming back to the point, I think the Rosa Curtin quote, it was framed in context of Britishness against, say, other nationalities, immigrants gelling with the British nationality, and that had a different context. In Indian context, as Alpana pointed out, the demographic configuration of minority and majority can differ. In Kashmir, the majority could be different, and the minority, of course, was a different community. Similarly, there are districts in India, say Kishanganj district in Bihar, which has around 67% Muslim population. Now, there the demographic or the narratives of victimhood would be quite different. Similarly, some other pockets. So that kind of a scale is always relevant to keep in mind. Also, the catharsis was more to say with the national picture, means channelizing of an ideological point of view that what has been untold is the victimhood of a different kind. Now, that's a very national scale storytelling and not very particular to the details of a geographical region. So, yes, that's a difference. That's a difference that has to be seen, yes.
Raman sir, your inputs on this, and if before I just wanted to add one thing regarding the project. Vivek Agnihotri has been given Y category security, and very importantly, he has not once condemned any of the outbursts of bigotry, of grotesque calls for, I mean, just short of let's, ride roughshod over the Muslims. He hasn't commented on that at all so far, and neither have any of the states that have made it tax free. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
But that was never the idea. I mean, they are not going to condemn, any kind of bigotry. I'm for the minimum censorship. I still maintain that. And but in the same breath, I would also like to say, if I want to make a movie on Gujarat massacre today, whether the censorship is going to, clear it. If I also want to make a movie, a similar kind of movie and show the kind of atrocities that had happened over there. Now, the second thing that I will say, even I agree with Alpana, because whatever limited time I have spent in Jammu and Kashmir, Kashmiri Muslim culturally is very, very different from, the rest of the Muslims living in India. And also when the Kashmir thing was happening, the Indian Muslim hardly have any sympathy or anything to say, on the to take sides of the Kashmir Muslims. And this picture is, trying to paint all the Muslims as villains. So that's what they are trying to do, and that's what I mean. Even if I have not seen the movie, but I can very clearly see that how they are using it ideologically.
Now, let's, from the big picture, I just want to come down to the small picture of your experiences while shooting there. You have in the last Hafta, the link to the earlier Hafta when Alpana was actually on this show will be in the show notes below. You had told me about the contacts, like when you would go interview a militant, a young girl, lady, okay, you must have been in your 20s or 30s at that time, going to interview a militant in the wild.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a certain amount of trust you'd had, and these were local, Muslims. It's sad that we have to point out what religion they were, who you trust with, technically with your life. I mean, that's what you were doing. You were going to be dealing with 8 people with, automatic weapons in the middle of a forest who have in the past
Yes.
killed people. So give me the personal aspect of what it was like reporting, because I wish we had some commentators doing that rather than the shouting nutters who've never left a studio that I see these days. Just an experience without of ideology, who was right, what are the politics. What was it like for you to be there?
So look, there's no question that the movement started as a movement for independence, for Azadi. It's important to make this distinction because it had the broad support of middle class, literate, intellectual Kashmir. So people like, people who worked in government, poets, writers, these are the people who supported the idea of Azad Kashmir as a lovely, beautiful dream. It was not a menacing, horrible, sort of Islamist oriented place. It was a place of equality. It was a place, but it was independent of Indian domination, because their experience of Indian rule has been toppling governments, has been manipulating puppet regimes, etc. So more that than democracy. Yes, there were spells of democracy, but their experience has been with many, many caveats. It's not entirely that point of view, but it has been difficult. Now, this idea of Azadi was taken over by Pakistan because they are Muslim, and this was a perfect intervention spot or area to come in, and it turned Islamist. But my point is, meeting these people personally, like you said, putting my life into their hands. I was in my mid-20s. I was, I think, 25, 26 years old. And when you're that young, I don't think you think things through so completely either. But there were a lot of risks that we took, not just me, but our camera crew, Bharat Raj and Rehan Kidwai and Ajmal Jami and, Badri, all these people who were with me, Pranesh, all these people, and in Newstrack, our entire team, all of us, we went there, we spoke to people, we got their point of view. What did they want? I mean, right now you're not speaking to them. There's silence. At that time, we went and we reported, what did the Kashmiri Muslims want? What was their idea of Azadi? And they were very happy to speak to us, very happy to tell us and take us to these places that, to make us meet the militants, find out what they wanted. When I met Mastgul, this was around the mid-90s. By that time, the complexion of the movement had changed from Azadi to Nizam-e-Mustafa, which was an Islamist, the Azadi guys had all been killed or they were in jail. The Hizbul Mujahideen, which was an Islamist party propped up by the Pakistanis at that point in time, they had taken over. So they were, they were propagating a different kind of thing. And that was the first time actually I felt in danger, because these were not people who had my well-being in mind. They would not hesitate to, sacrifice me or dump me if needed. But otherwise, my interactions with Kashmiri Muslims were we got into fierce arguments. We yelled each other down. And, I don't stand for the idea of Kashmiri independence because I think all religion-based divisions are terrible, having come from a partition family myself. But I respected their point of view and they heard me out. So we had huge intellectual discussions, shouting matches. They sulked with me. I remember one professor, we were sitting in an empty classroom and there was a little podium where the lecturer sits. So we were sitting together on the benches and talking. And he was so angry with me, he got up and he went and sat on the raised podium and turned his back to me. And this is a guy I've been to seminars with. We have sat together and joked and laughed and shared meals. And so that was the kind of, what should I say, relationship, one can say, being on opposite sides of the fence, yet giving the space to each other to give our points of view. And I understood some points of their view and they understood some points of mine.
And this mythology that it has not been covered, I remember you very early had told me that Kashmir was the sexy story. I think Anand also articulated it, that it's got more.
Yes.
I remember you used to say that if you wanted to make a splash in journalism, you had to go to Kashmir. So everybody was in Kashmir.
Yeah. No, but I think this is the most vile, fake, and revolting thing about the untruths that this movie spreads. Who said that it wasn't covered? It was completely covered. It was on the cover of India Today. I'm talking about the Kashmiri Pandit story. Forget about Kashmir. Just the Kashmiri Pandit exodus was hugely covered. It was covered extensively by Sunday magazine, which existed at that point. It was a weekly, very prominent weekly. It was covered by India Today. It was covered by all the national newspapers. Relentlessly, pictures were taken. Doordarshan covered it, blanket, wall-to-wall coverage. So how was it not covered? I mean, you can sit very smugly today in the era of social media and look back, because there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, there was nothing, nothing of the sort. And you can sit in this era of live television and look back and say, oh, it was never covered. But that is complete rubbish, complete. And this is an absolute, thorough, complete lie. I was there. I know. And Manoj Raghuvanshi did a 20-minute story which extensively looked at every part of this and gave the Kashmiri Pandit point of view so sympathetically and so well. And so did I. I have interviewed so many Kashmiri Pandit leaders, Jattu Shivanduda, who was a chartered accountant, unfortunately passed away. So many people at that time. In fact, I followed the story up to 18 years later. I went because I did a fellowship, which is where I traveled the whole of rural Kashmir and Jammu, looking for, working on identity politics and looking for, points of view specifically to the Pandit community and the Muslim community. And I went and met, and I've written a piece which I think Newslaundry is going to carry, which explains this relationship between the Kashmiri Pandits who fled the valley and the Kashmiri Muslims. I think, you have to stop at lying. You can't keep lying so much. There was massive coverage and everybody got a fair understanding of that. What people don't know today, I think the biggest context to understand today is that at that point in time, when this tragedy was unfolding and the Kashmiris were fleeing, and they were a tiny, tiny minority, and they fled to Jammu and all their massive numbers, whatever the entire community, at that point in time, Kashmir was barely a thread away from being lost to India. You have to understand that. So all the forces were concentrated, governmental, administrative, army, paramilitary, whatever you call it, all hands on deck to ensure that that did not happen. Because at that time, there were demonstrations of, 1 lakh, 2 lakhs. Manoj has captured that in his fantastic story in 1990 of how everybody in Srinagar was out on the streets. It was a hugely challenging time for the Indian state. The army was on the border. It had never done it had not come inside Kashmir. It was not prepped. It was not organized. Today, it took 4 or 5, maybe more, maybe 6 years to set up the security grid. And now it's functioning so smoothly 30 years later that you can say, why the hell didn't they stop the Kashmiri Pandits? Why didn't, at that point in time, if a Pandit was sitting on a mountain in some village, he was the only guy in the village. He was a minority. He was just maybe 2 Pandit families or 3 Pandit families in a village in some remote mountain area. How is the army going to protect him?
And also, I think the context people don't get is now when you have those Friday, regular stone throwing was a few thousand people and it became such a big deal. I don't think these days they can comprehend what it was like for 1 lakh, 2 lakh people to collect.
No ways, my God. You couldn't step out on the street before like I said, the news track stories are such an authentic document of that era. It is invaluable as for historians or just for today's young generation to understand how history unfolded then. And just to give you an example, if those lakhs people had taken over the 10 guards at Doordarshan, made a proclamation that Kashmir was independent, Pakistan army had decided to walk in and of course, the army was at the border, would not allow them to do so easily, but there would have been massive civil war. Because at that time, how were militants being made? The Kashmiri Muslims were going across to Pakistan, getting training and coming back. How did they come back? Because the borders were semi-open, semi-permeable, just like Kargil happened. So now you have a fence, now you have all these things are nicely in place. So how patronizing that you sit here in a position of strength and you say, they should have done this. I think that's an insult really to the heroism of the armed forces, because I think at that point in time in 1990 to 96 they literally fought with their backs to the wall to keep Kashmir within India. And have the Kashmiri Pandit tragedy unfold at that time, well, it was part of, like I said, the larger picture. You had to save Kashmir from slipping out.
Yeah.
And this is what happened in the middle of that.
Raman sir, go ahead.
No, and I saw a very different picture. In 2000, what Alpana is telling, it was completely missing. By then, the security forces, they had set up.
They were everywhere, right?
And everywhere. They were all over. And at that time, the kind of picture that I saw was very, very different from what Alpana is telling.
Yeah. So I think that context is altogether missing in the conversations, but it remains a mystery to me as to the only channel in India today that has the most rich, authentic footage of back then is just not using it. I cannot comprehend why would someone not do that. But I would just quickly like to touch upon one more issue before we thank our
One thing,
panel. Yeah, go ahead, Anand.
one thing is that the coverage of it, or quote unquote lack of it, is another matter. But the conspiracy theories, now, why did that happen? And particularly in foreign press, maybe the tiny quarters of foreign press, the motive behind the exodus, or there was an interview that V.S. Napol gave in 1993 to Dilip Padgaonkar, then the editor of Times of India, and he said that in Britain, the newspaper, The Independent, which now has, I think, become a digital paper only. So he said that the Independent's New Delhi correspondent had filed a report that the Indian state themselves drove out the Kashmiri Pandits so that their armed forces could have a free hand in Kashmir. So the conspiracy theories in a section of foreign press was quite different. That was also the part of the narrative.
Yeah, I think that was definitely later when I went back in 2008 for my fellowship, and I was traveling in rural Kashmir, and I spent a lot of time, like I said, questioning people on identity. I think what emerged for me then quite clearly was that no one likes to be accused of ethnic cleansing. And I think internationally, Kashmiri Muslims who drove their, actually, they are the drivers of their own struggle. If they wanted to get free, they wanted independence, then, they are the ones pushing it, they're the ones leading it. They wanted to be seen in a better light, not as ethnic cleansers, but as victims. So there are various, what should I say, everybody likes to paint themselves as the good guys.
Yeah.
And I think this was one way of saying, well, it wasn't us, it was the Indian state. I think at that point in time, there was no question that the Kashmiri Pandits were being terrorized. They had to flee, or they had to then, wait for the Indian state to protect them, which, like I just told you, did not have the wherewithal at that point in time to protect them individually. They could protect a group or a ghetto or a colony, but they could not protect them individually in far-flung areas. And so they are the ones who came pleading to the government, save us, do something. And any government who is faced with the terror of these people, and it has to protect its citizens. So if they made arrangements, or if they created an infrastructure to take them out safely, well, that's what governments are supposed to do. If their citizens are in no position to protect themselves, this is what governments should do, and that's what they did. So I think, look, foreign press is always going to be sympathetic to the underdog. It's the same in Ukraine. It's never going to be sympathetic to Russia. Not that I sympathize with the Russians because of the terrible carnage they have done in Ukraine, but there is no appreciation for the Russian point of view. They will push the underdog, even though it might destabilize the region, which is exactly what happened in Kashmir as well. The Kashmiri Muslim was seen as an underdog.
Right. So before I move on quickly, I just want to briefly touch upon, the rumblings, political rumblings within the country. Bit that Alpana pointed out about everybody wants to see themselves as an underdog. This was very beautifully captured by R.K. Narayan's short story, An Astrologer's Day, where there's this guy who's an astrologer and he reads palms, and he tells this guy, and he tells this to everybody because everybody believes this about themselves, that you are very soft on the inside but very hard on the outside. No matter how big a pushover, everybody likes to see themselves as formidable outside but have a very warm and soft heart. And the second, the world has been very unfair to you. You give a lot more to the world than the world gives to you. And everybody believes this about themselves. So that was the takeaway from the Astrologer's Day. Now, if I could just ask the panel quickly, because we discussed in great detail the disaster that is the Congress party and it's falling apart. And we had, in fact, very dissimilar views within the panel last week or the week before last when we discussed it, where my view was there is no Congress without the Gandhis. So I don't know what they're talking about, because we saw the Congress without the Gandhis. In fact, when Alps was my boss, when Sitaram Kesri took over, it just went down. And there was this dramatic scene where in the CWC meeting, she was insulted. She got up and walked off because she lived walking distance. And then half the Congress went out chasing her. And she brought it back to 10 years of, UPA rule. So I don't see whether Sibbal or Chidambaram see themselves as the leaders or anyone from the G23. But does anyone here think that Sonia Gandhi's response of reaching out to the dissenters has been a smart one, which clearly is against the way Priyanka and Rahul have dealt with them, that people who abandon the party at this time will never be welcomed? It's this like very bratish, I will never talk to you in my life again. Does anyone have a view on this at all?
The differences were really, having an impact on the party as a whole. So I think it was a smart move. But having said that, when you said that there cannot be any Congress without Gandhis, so I say that the Gandhis have, at the moment, they have no organizational capacity. The party is just disintegrating. So I really hardly see. I can't see. Gandhis, leading the Congress out of the crisis at this point of time.
Anand, you have a view?
So in the earlier part of the discussion, we were talking about something else, and I said that to enforce discipline, the party needs big electoral wins, and that is not coming its way. So as long as it's on back foot, the moral authority of the high command would be severely dented. That is something stating the obvious, but that is the heat being faced. And Sonia Gandhi of late seems to have realized that. But second point, as you said, that in a disintegrating kind of political entity, the glue is the dynastic legacy itself. So the only glue that is there with the Congress is the dynastic appeal. Whether that has become a liability is another matter also. So I think Congress is in a peculiar situation, whether it has been pushed to decide for itself that dynasty is a liability or an asset for itself. And for the time being, I think bereft of other attractive options, it has put all its eggs in one basket, and that is dynasty. And Sonia Gandhi's response comes from a dented moral authority of a series of electoral debacles, and one way of cementing that support base among the leftover workers is to make them feel valuable, or even the top leadership, whatever remains, which are notables who have dissented, this group of dissenters. So that is one of the lifelines she has, and she has used it.
Right. Alps, you have a view?
I actually don't agree with this notion that the Congress is nothing without the Gandhis or cannot exist. I think there is a very strong, coherent element that is separate from dynasty that holds the Congress together. And that is its counter narrative to today's right-wing ideology. I think there is enough of a base within the country that wants this counter narrative. In fact, I think it's probably waiting for it in some avatar or the other, to have the ability to take off from the ground, which the Gandhis have kept it tethered to by their clinging on to something that, like I think Anand said, is a disintegrating system and party. I think if anyone can take this counter narrative and run with it, my belief is everything has to be, if something is destroyed, something else will take its place. That is the way of history. So something has to be destroyed before something else can take its place. If the Gandhis are permanently sitting on this structure, not moving from their place, no one can take their place. But if that party is completely obliterated and there is allowed to be or forced to be another set of players who come in and inherit this counter narrative and are able to build on the sort of destroyed infrastructure or maybe the old links or the old networks, I don't see why that shouldn't happen. I think that the time for the dynasty part is now over. I'm not sure anybody sees them as glue anymore.
And to say that there is no alternative to Gandhis is also not true. I think leadership emerges out of churning.
Yes.
So once they move away, somebody else will come up with this counter narrative, and it'll make the party stronger. But with Gandhis, the party is just not moving with Gandhis. So I think Gandhis must go.
I think that vacuum that you're talking about, the rush of the wind that occupies any vacuum, is not internally being done by leadership, but AAP is maximizing it. That is why AAP is winning states that the
Yes.
Congress had a dominance in, whether it's
Which
Delhi.
means that there is a demand for that counter narrative. It just doesn't exist, so people don't know who to vote for.
So the point is, if Congress doesn't, choke up, then it won't be another version of the Congress that will take it over. Another party may take over that space. That's the danger, right?
Now, two things need to be differentiated here. One is the counter narrative part, that the Congress system, it is a very age-old political entity with a system in place, absorbing different sections. What Rajni Kothari called the Congress system in early 60s. So that is a different thing. Means that counter narrative, that a kind of option with which still has around 10 crore votes nationwide. In the last Lok Sabha polls, they got 10 crore votes, which even with 50 odd seats is a substantial number. But Gandhi family has a glue with the existing organizational muscle they have. So with the current organization, there is no alternative leadership as of now on 24th March 2022. So we are talking of now that if the leadership goes to states, the Pradesh Congress committees, now the only persons they are willing to somehow reluctantly, even though reluctantly, listen to are Gandhis and no one else. That's the reality. So the cultivation of second line of leadership may take maybe 10 years or 15 years, but yes, if the place is vacated, then also that only that possibility will arise. But as of now, with even with a very dented moral authority, they are only persons who are willing to be who workers are willing to listen in whatever
In the states, right?
scale. And second is also that the leadership itself in is not betting a lot. Means they are not willing to have frontal leadership like Priyanka Gandhi, not sticking her neck out and getting involved in direct electoral clashes. It was expected that she would be a candidate in 2019 Lok Sabha polls. She didn't. She led the campaign in UP this year, but didn't field herself as an MLA candidate. Now, they are not willing to get their fingers burned in direct electoral fights. Now that's also a sign that they would be in long run become a liability.
Kind of, the leadership that Gandhis have been providing right now, the Congress is just withering away. I mean, there will be no workers. I mean, they have a couple of states right now. I think in another 5 years, if the things remain like this, they are going to lose those states too. So I think Gandhis are not effective anymore.
New elections, new political times, new realities will emerge. So I mean, we'll wind up all the issues. I'll be going to the emails, but before that, we can say goodbye to Alpana. So before you go, Alps, some recommendation for our listeners that could enrich their lives other than Kashmir Files.
Well, as a counter narrative to Kashmir Files, I'm going to recommend my own story. I'm sorry if I'm doing that, but I think it's really important. This is a part of a fellowship that I did in 2008 when I said I went back to Kashmir and Jammu to explore identity politics. I think this gives the true and authentic picture of the relationship between the Kashmiri Muslims and the Kashmiri Pandits. This story is a story about two friends and how they separated because the Kashmiri Pandit had to flee, and the Kashmiri Muslim and his role and the friendship that exists till today. It's a very emotional, a very moving story, and it gives you a real humane glimpse into the lives of the Kashmiri people as a whole and what their society was or could have been, and how different it is from the what is shown in the absolutely lopsided, one-sided narrative or black and white narrative of the Kashmir Files. So I think Newslaundry is going to carry that soon, and I would recommend that. I would recommend that listeners and readers read that.
So it'll be in the show notes below, the link to it. Thank you, Alpana. Thank you for making the time.
Yeah, it's called Who Will Tell Them That This Land Belongs to Your Father When I Die? And these are the words of the Kashmiri Pandit friend. So, like I said, this is a story about friendship. And I would recommend that. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alpana. And we shall now move on to the emails that all you wonderful subscribers write. Just to give you a reminder that please subscribe and pay to keep news free. I had mentioned in the awful and awesome week before last that we saw sudden dip in subscription numbers in March. And I guess it was maybe because of election fatigue. Many of you said, "ठीक है, बहुत election देख लिया, बहुत consume कर ली news now. We don't need to support news." Well, news needs to be supported through the year because it is the only way that you get information that is of public service, that is to you. So it is best it is funded by you. So go to newslaundry.com, click on the subscribe button. All your Mufat khors who are listening to this for free, because this particular hafta we are giving out for free, and this one is not going to be behind the paywall, doesn't mean there is no incentive for you to subscribe. There is other stuff and benefits you get. Check out our subscription page and understand what those are. But do subscribe. The link is in the show notes below. So this email is from Ashima. Abhinandan, for God's sake, millennials are 26 to 40 plus at this point. We know what Encyclopedia Britannica is, and we had them when we were young. Shift your jokes to Gen Z and Zoomers. There's a generation called Zoomers? As a Gen Z are called Zoomers. I didn't know that. Is it because of the Zoom that the Zoom software? I don't know. Okay. Now this is an email from Aryan. He said not to read it out because it's a logistical issue. Yes, Aryan, your email has been sent to our product department regarding the RSS feed, etc. And hopefully it shall be resolved soon. Sorry it's taken so long to resolve it. Then this email is regarding by Aryan, maybe the same Aryan, a different one. He says, I was very frustrated at the false equivalence Suhasini brought up in criticizing the unilateral actions taken by Russia and the West. Yes, both actions are unilateral, but the Russian action was an unprovoked action which resulted in thousands dying. The West was simply reacting to the Russian action. Furthermore, the fact that we use the word West and not US alone shows how it was indeed multilateral without using organizations. The fall of organizations like the UN is sad, but that does not mean the West shouldn't try to act in its own territorial interest. And the sanctions have actually been quite successful compared to other sanctions. As a side point, I have to commend Abhinandan for standing up to accusations of blaming the white man reaction too. Syria is far away from Europe, but physically and culturally, both physically and culturally, Ukraine borders the EU. To react differently if there's a bombing near your house versus in a far-flung place is completely justified. Now this email, the person doesn't want to be named. They say, I watched the movie The Kashmir Files. It is an excellent propaganda movie, merely putting on screen what I had heard from my friends attending shakhas during my medical school days. The face of religious extremism and anti-India sentiment shown in the movie is not hard to believe either, as I have seen it firsthand among doctors employed at the Institute from Kashmir. I'm sure the truth is somewhere in between the two competing narratives, as it usually is. The fact that over 1 lakh people were driven away from their homes has been brought forward in the popular culture by a fascist regime is shameful for all those who call themselves liberal or secular. People in cinema and journalism who think they are on the right side of history should take this movie as a wake-up call and stop turning a blind eye towards extremism in the minority communities. By not talking about such issues, we concede space to those who later weaponize it for their own motives. Then another anonymous letter says, I noticed the Hindu Yuva Society, the RSS student wing abroad, of my grad school has organized free screenings of Kashmir Files at a theatre outside campus. This is obviously much more expensive than regular film screenings at the school theatre. The Hindu Yuvas are also offering transportation to the theatre, much like Newslaundry reporters saw in Delhi NCR. Please reach out if you need their flyer from my school. Interesting. Okay, we shall get in touch. This is an interesting report. Then Sagar says, an article recently published in Newslaundry called the Karnataka verdict as upholding the hijab ban. Please stop spreading misinformation. The court order merely upheld the school's right to prescribe uniform that applies to all. So if this is hijab ban, it should be also called the dhoti ban or lungi ban. Sagar, I agree with you. In fact, funnily enough, I had pointed this out on the Hafta last week, that why is the headline saying hijab ban as if the hijab has been banned across the state. I wasn't aware that we were using the same terminology in our own stories as well. So, yeah, I agree with you. Then Rishikesh Jagtap says, I have been following Newslaundry since it was free and requesting for voluntary subscription on PayPal. I was one of the supporters back then. That time when Madhu was mentioning that she wanted to follow a model of subscription-based journalism, I was thinking that to be a foolish idea for the Indian market. And Newslaundry is going to die when you implement that model. I'm happy to be proven wrong and you have survived. I'm very thankful to all subscribers. I have purchased really game-changer subscription for this, the first time, to extend my support. Access to RSS link is great. Good job, you all. Love you, NL team and the subscriber community. Thank you so much, Rishikesh. You weren't the only one who thought this was a really bad idea. Raman sir also thought it was a bad idea, as did many others. But thanks to you and thousands like you, we have survived. Spread the word, because if this becomes a model for news, I think we can see at least one aspect that doesn't depend too much on corporate funding, which is useful in today's day and age. And finally, Surya says, a very happy Holi to you all. Loved the election coverage. A quick feedback on how the Hafta episodes are listed on the website. Many Newslaundry subscribers consume Hafta while driving or performing other activities. It's super annoying when by mistake Chota Hafta starts playing and one has to stop driving or stop another activity to change it to the full episode. To solve it, could you please filter the Hafta episode list API as per the status, full episode or Chota Hafta, and show only the relevant result when a logged in paying sub? That's actually useful. But Surya, fine, I shall forward your mail to the product department. But one more thing, I think our app is out. The Android app is out. I think the iOS app should also be out. And this function, I think, is there in that. Do check if the app is out. If it's not, it will be in a week. The Android one, I'm sure, is out. And tell me what your experience is on the app. And that goes for all you subscribers. Let us know, because you guys paid for that app, by the way. So we can still tweak it and make it better as we go on. Now let's get the recommendations of the week. Anand, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm recommending a novel that I recently read. It's Villainy. It's called Villainy by Upmanyu Chatterjee. So he's one of the leading writers writing in English in India, and he's a bit of a recluse, not very visible in the literary landscape, but people still know him for what he wrote 4 decades ago. That is his debut novel, The English August. So in these times of look at me authors, when they go like a marketing magnet for promotions, he's an odd man out, so has become somewhat invisible. But the sense of the particular, means his ability to bring out the sense of a particular situation or locale or human condition with a very humanist kind of humor is without a rival. And you will see some glimpses of it in his latest novel, The Villainy, though it's not the best of his work, but still at this age, he has produced a work which is far, far better than the lesser works which are much talked about these days. Yes.
Right. Thank you. Raman sir?
I have 3 recommendations. The 2 articles which appeared in Indian Express. One is on Kashmir, Listen to All Those Who Suffered, by Archal magazine. She has heard, stories of, she herself being a Pandit. She has heard these stories through her parents, who once used to live in, Kashmir, and she herself was very small when they left Kashmir. And she has made a very pertinent point that the real issues which plague the Pandits, their resettlement and all, they haven't been addressed through. So better in this time of crisis, when you are highlighting a picture so much, you also address to these issues. And second article is by this is I think the former deputy chief minister of Bihar, Sushil Kumar Modi, which appeared today. MP quota for Kendriya Vidyalaya admissions must go. I mean, if you are aware of this, that this week only, I think this week or the last week, the Congress MP, had made a plea in Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, I think. He said that either, they should increase the quota, of Kendriya Vidyalaya admission for an MP, or they should abolish it altogether. He has made a very pertinent, again, a very good, point that already there are 1,000 odd seats are reserved for these MPs, all put together. So, I mean, and this really is not good for the, quality of education.
Yeah, this is today Sushil Kumar
Yeah,
Modi has
today,
put this.
Sushil
Yes,
Kumar
yes,
Modi.
I
It
read
was a
it.
good article. And the third is, there's a documentary called Limitless on Netflix. So if nothing was working for, these women, they took to running. So it's very inspiring. Limitless is the name.
Right. Thank you, sir.
So, just a minor rejoinder to my recommendation. So, since Mr. Chatterjee does not give video interviews, he has not given in more number of years. So, the news and we at Newslaundry reached out to him for a video interview, and true to his recluse form, at the last moment he cancelled it. So,
Well, at
so
least you tried.
yes, yes. So he was supposed to give it on Saturday, so he cancelled it. So just that is a clarification that even his publisher would like to know. Yes.
Right. Thank you. But thanks for trying, Anand. Maybe we'll try to convince him for an audio podcast if he doesn't like video. We'll keep trying. Let's
No,
do that.
I think someone had also the production had offered him a text interview.
Even that he turned
But,
down. Wow.
he turned down. Also, he has to go abroad on Monday or something, maybe because of that.
I see. All right, chalo. We shall keep trying. Both my recommendations this week actually from NPR. One is a podcast and one is a newsletter, which actually I consumed on the same day. One actually answered my own question that I had put 4 weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks ago, that why are all these Russians getting, embargoed and their stuff being taken over? It actually explains how Putin's so-called reforms devastated ordinary Russians, and this new class of oligarchs got all the spoils. So that they should pay for Putin's actions kind of seems more justified now. And the second is a very short podcast called Race, Racism and the Tax Law. And NPR keeps doing this, and this is why I think it has such fantastic content, which using data demonstrates how, laws that we think have nothing to do with race or community or anything, the fact that who made the law and what privilege they came from actually determines how badly it impacts people. So even a tax law which seems race agnostic actually favors a particular race. It's a fascinating kind of insight into that. With those recommendations, I will say goodbye. All recommendations are linked in the show notes below. Do check them out. So is a subscription appeal and our subscription page in the show notes below. And if you want to reach out to us and give feedback, criticism, critique, inputs, or appreciation, use the link below. You can write to podcasts@newslaundry.com, but it would be more efficient if you just used the link. Thank you, Raman sir. Thank you, Anand. And thank you, dear listeners. So thank you, Anil, for recording, and Tahreem. And thank you, dear subscribers. Spread the word. We shall see you next week.
All the Newslaundry podcasts are available on Stitcher, iTunes, and any other podcast platform.
Please subscribe to Newslaundry. Help us keep news independent. To catch all our podcasts on news, pop culture, current affairs, and sport, visit newslaundry.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
We as a small team at Newslaundry have been doing our best to bring you factual ground reports and podcasts and interviews to give you the best information possible at this point. It's more important than ever that you support us and that you help us fight the good fight.